You're watching a production of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Coming up on this episode of Dakota Life, we pack and climb to great South Dakota destinations. Explore renovations at the historic Fire Lookout Tower way up on Harney Peak, and see the horsepower behind the 3-mile trek to the summit. Learn 42 reasons why Rapid City was called the best presidential attraction. Plus, see how this American painting comes to life in the Black Hills. It's all coming up on this episode of Dakota Life. Hi, and welcome to Dakota Life. I'm Larry Rohr. The U.S. Forest Service in the Black Hills is involved in a multi-year project to restore the old stone lookout tower at Harney Peak. It's a job that presents some unique challenges. SDPB's Brian Gevick and videographer Josh Kapler hiked to the tower during the 2014 construction phase and brought back this look at the ongoing work.
The Harney Peak Lookout Tower was built by Civilian Conservation Corps workers in 1938 and 39. It's massive and sturdy looking, like it should stand forever. But perched on exposed granite at 7,242 feet above sea level, it's exposed to relentless weather extremes and occasional vandalism.
The windows were missing, the doors were missing, and a lot of the masonry was starting to fall apart. So water was infiltrating into the building and getting back behind the stonework, and it was starting to crumble. Particularly a spot where a member of the public had set a campfire on top of the terrace of the tower and burned through the roof.
So in 2012, the Forest Service came up with a preservation game plan for the structure. Since 30 to 40,000 people visit the tower annually, nobody liked the alternative to renovation.
So our intent is not to close it off from the public. We want people to enjoy it. We want people to feel the history.
The first fire spotters working on Harney Peak had some equipment, but no shelter.
In those days, that's all you had was the guy up there with a map and trying to call in a smoke.
At around the turn of the 20th century, a wooden shack was built and anchored to the mountain with heavy cables. People walked up the mountain to see it and to take in the spectacular view. Forest managers realized that they had a new priority.
A lookout tower that also served the purpose of recreation.
The location and elevation of the site challenged builders in the 1930s, and for today's preservationists, it's not a lot easier. Harney Peak is situated in the granite heart of the Black Hills, in the middle of the federally protected Black Elk Wilderness.
It's actually the highest point east of the Rocky Mountains. The next highest point is in the Pyrenees in Spain.
Load it up.
No motorized vehicles are allowed in the wilderness area, and no power tools. A road built for the 1930s project is long gone, so everything for the renovation project, from tools to construction materials to food and water, has to be carried up. Workdays begin and end with organizing, packing, and a 3.5-mile hike up and down roughly 1,100 vertical feet. The good news, pack mules and horses do most of the heavy lifting.
You know, the pack stock is definitely needed working in the backcountry.
Glenn Ryan is a U.S. Forest Service packer in charge of the Rocky Mountain Regional Pack String, one of just 2 in the nation. Ryan's getting help today from a group of South Dakota volunteers, 4 members of the Black Hills Backcountry Horsemen, Doug Beshen, Brad Bilka, and Jim and Alice Allen. Everything that goes up has to be weighed and balanced on the animals.
42.
You know, what we're looking for is the weights and the size being the same. Even though the weights may be the same, if the size is different, that'll throw it off. I prefer using the mules to pack. They're stronger, they're more intelligent, their agility is much more so than a horse.
The pack string heads up the trail between Sylvan Lake and Harney Peak. If everything works out, the trip should take only a couple of hours, and a little quicker is a little better. They have another trip to do today. pack string arrives at a point a couple of hundred feet below the lookout. Supplies are taken off of the mules and placed onto the backs of Forest Service workers and volunteers for the rest and steepest part of the trip. The packers will spend all of Monday just getting supplies to the mountaintop. A lot of it will have to be brought back down when this year's work ends on Friday. Even though the weather earlier this week was warm and sunny and clear, weather changes fast in the Black Hills. By Wednesday, it's foggy, it's cold. The crew's still working.
We're not using power tools. We're using hammers, a lot of traditional tools, as they're called, hand saws and hoes for mixing masonry ourselves, and doing the work the way they would have done it 100 years ago.
Inside the tower, specialists and volunteers work on preparing windows and doors for installation. Masons working outside focus on repairing the 80-year-old grout between the stones.
My goal is to, just by sounding, but just by feel as well, figure out how much of this grout is solid and what's loose, and then really try to only take out what's loose, create a great surface for bonding, and put in new mortar.
Access to some of the tower is only possible using ropes.
We have 3 people that are trained to use rope work and with rigging to be suspended, and they're suspended over the edge of the tower above a 200-foot drop and working on putting in mortar and stuffing the sealant around the window frames and getting them trimmed out for us.
Staff and volunteers here all say the tower job is a special experience. It's a cool place to work, and there's a feeling of being closely connected to the past and to people much like themselves. Something found sealed under a stone cemented that connection, proof that the people who built the tower felt a connection to the future and to the workers here now, today. Sean Smith was working on the massive railing near the tower's main entrance.
And I came across the rim of it turned out to be old flashing, just a tube of old flashing with the butt of a bottle sticking out of that. And it took about a half an hour to get the bottle out of that tube because it was wrapped in, I think, 4 different newspapers from different areas.
5 different newspapers all around the time of Germany invading Poland. And it was the days before the invasion and the 2 days after the invasion from all different newspapers around the country. And I know that they chose those newspapers on purpose, that they knew that was an important time. There was big stuff happening then. They could have just grabbed 2 copies of the local paper and just stuffed it in if they were just going to be using it to wrap the newspaper, to wrap the bottle, but they didn't. They chose specific newspapers that had a message there, and I think there's something to that.
A group of the Masons, when they finished the wall, they put the bottle in with the agreement that they were going to come back 10 years later and crack it open and drink it. And I don't think they ever did.
It was all evaporated.
George Rowe was one of the CCC workers who helped build the tower. In 1939, he was 19 years old. At 92, he became the last original worker known to have returned to the site. Rowe was brought most of the way on horseback, but climbed the final steps on his own.
5 days a week and thought nothing of it.
The past, present, and future run together here in this highest of the Black Hills high country, in this rock tower built for one purpose, but perhaps forever serving another.
We just need to preserve it so that people in the future can enjoy it, so my grandkids can come here.
Work on the 2014 phase of the project will be finished in about a week, with continued funding from the National Trust for Historic Preservation and several private organizations. Work will continue through at least 2015.
The Equestrian Club volunteers helping with the Harney Peak Tower renovation earned some national recognition for their work during the first phase of the project in 2013. The parent organization behind the Black Hills Backcountry Horsemen, the Backcountry Horsemen of America, honored the South Dakota chapter with its annual Double Diamond Award.
It's a very big deal. This is a very prestigious award. It was presented at the National Backcountry Horsemen meeting in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we were up against several other backcountry horsemen chapters. 2 of them were in Colorado and 2 of them were in California.
But the Harney Peak Lookout Tower represents just a fraction of all the volunteer work that the Black Hills Backcountry Horsemen do. Here's SDPB's Brian Gevick again with a look at how the Equestrian Club's effort make Black Hills recreation a little better for everyone.
When the Black Hills Backcountry Horsemen saddle up for a day on the trail, sometimes they pack chainsaws. And when they head out on the trail, sometimes they don't ride very long before they dismount and get to work. One person runs the saw, one holds the horses, and one moves the cuttings off to the side. Members of the Backcountry Horsemen of America are doing similar work on public trails all over the country.
Their primary mission is to keep public lands open to recreational and responsible equestrian use. And one of the methods that we use to accomplish that is we help out the land management agencies.
Agencies like the U.S. Forest Service.
They've got a trail system and recreation sites that they no longer have the funding to maintain.
It would be easier to just complain about why not all the trails are in good shape. Instead, they say,
we'll help. That's what we want to do. We want to help the agencies keep the trails open, keep them maintained, and by doing that, it protects the resources, because if you keep people on the trails, if you can keep the water drained off the trails from using proper maintenance and stuff, it helps protect the land.
Jim Allen knows what he's talking about. He worked for the Forest Service 33 years, 29 of them in the Black Hills before retiring. Other members have professional experience in range management and wildlife biology. But volunteers working for the Forest Service need to be qualified in other ways as well. They have to be covered by an agreement that makes them essentially Forest Service employees covered by workman's comp.
So we are treated the same as their employees, where we have to go through training and certification and prove our proficiency to Forest Service certifiers that we can safely operate a chainsaw and that we use all the safety equipment and methods that the employees of the Forest Service do.
Heads up, have a safety person with you.
That safety awareness is a constant. The group gets a few safety tips and a couple of reminders before a work session on a rainy Saturday morning.
Make sure you've got an escape route when we're starting to cut up the draws in the bigger logs and stuff like that, because we're coming from the bottom.
The trails are obviously wet and slick today, and even though these experienced riders would probably all be fine, it's agreed that in the interest of safety, the horses will stay at camp. The crews will be walking today. It's slow going today. Ponderosa pines killed by mountain pine beetles and aspen trees bent and broken by winter storms are numerous this year.
Probably the worst I've seen it in many years. The Atlas blizzard in October put a lot of this timber down. Normally we wouldn't see a lot of these aspen down. They normally aren't our problem in here, but all these trees still had leaves on them in October, and the weight from the storm with the leaves on them dropped all these trees. So we've got quite a mess in here this year.
They cut and clear in a path wide enough and tall enough for horses.
For horse and pack stock, we like to have 4 foot on each side of the tread of the main trail for width, 8 foot at 3 foot high, and a 10-foot canopy.
The Black Hills Backcountry Horsemen have been around since 2010 and 4 years later can claim about 80 members. They do 3 to 4 work weekends during the year, but the organization really isn't all about the work.
We also have rides, trail rides. We get together with people from different states and have what we call rendezvous, where we go out and join other people and go riding and just enjoy the camaraderie of the group. So yeah, it's not just about work all the time.
I would say that anybody who enjoys trail riding, who enjoys the great outdoors, in any aspect of owning a horse or mule, and wants to go out into the backcountry and just see instead of being in an arena, this is the type of organization to belong to, because we cover country, we go where a lot of other people don't go, we go where a lot of other organizations can't go because we can ride in the wilderness. It's a pretty unique group.
Sure, we're concerned with keeping public lands open for equestrian use, but we also want to keep these trails open for everybody.
Jim Allen and others here are quick to point out that they're not the only special interest group helping keep the trails open. Area mountain bikers are getting similarly organized and doing their part as well. That's good, they say. There's more than enough work to do.
Still to come on Dakota Life, we show you 42 reasons to walk around downtown Rapid City. Plus, see how a famous American painting comes to life. But first, here's a look at SDPB's monthly installment of our Landscapes of South Dakota project.
Landscapes of South Dakota, the people, places, and experiences that make us and our state unique. As a young pharmacist in Canova 1931, Ted Husted and his wife Dorothy fulfilled a dream by moving to a store of their own in Wall. Though their families were skeptical, the Husteds gave their new venture 5 years to succeed. More travelers were going by to see the new Mount Rushmore, but not stopping. On a hot Sunday in July 1936, Ted made a short series of highway signs on the Burma Shave model, offering free ice water. By that afternoon, dozens of cars had stopped, and Dorothy told her husband, "I guess the free ice water signs worked." Today, summer traffic can be 20,000 people a day at Wall Drug. The Husteds are some of the extraordinary people who've carved their own niche out of welcoming travelers to the landscapes of South Dakota. Learn more and share your ideas about what makes South Dakota special at sdpb.org/landscapes.
Sometimes politics can drive people apart. But in one South Dakota city, an enormous effort over a decade in the making is doing just the opposite. And it's the only place in the world where you can see every U.S. president standing together. Here's the story.
In the heart of downtown Rapids stands another city. One cast in bronze, as long-lasting as the legacy of each man it represents. It's the City of Presidents, and for the past 14 years, these inanimate statues have been the life of downtown Rapid City. The idea of a City of Presidents came from local businessman Don Perdue, who noticed the large amount of attention a statue of Abraham Lincoln was getting downtown. His idea remained dormant, however, until one night at a Lincoln Day dinner, local realtor and artist liaison Dallery Davis got involved.
So he started wondering, if people are that interested in one president, would it not be cool if we could have every president on the streets of Rapid City?
Together, Perdue and Davis set an ambitious goal. 4 artists working on one statue a year could finish all 42 presidents in 10 years.
I wasn't that excited. It sounded a little boring to me, but I remember telling Dallery, it was just like, really? Presidents?
After finding the 4 artists to make a 10-year commitment, a City of Presidents began to take mold. Soon after, a nonprofit organization was formed and a board of directors was appointed to help in the process.
We did not want guys in suits standing on street corners. That could get really, really boring really quickly. And so we decided we wanted to be playful, maybe sometimes a little bit irreverent, never disrespectful. But the key word, the shining goal, was to make it interesting.
Making metal come to life would take hours of research, and the team went to great lengths to learn every detail about each president's life. They called presidential libraries, read biographies, and even contacted families.
We contacted the family and said, what can you tell us about John Tyler that will make an interesting sculpture? And they said, well, he loved to play the violin, and at all the family gatherings he would play the violin. So we gave him a violin.
I try to find something about him, things that he was interested in, the way that he thought, and try to portray that in the sculpture. To have more than just say photorealistic representation of the guy.
We're looking for that little kernel of thing that's just most interesting, and trying to find something that will really speak to people about the humanity of the presidents.
It was a task that proved difficult for presidents that served before photography.
And if you would line up all of these portraits of George Washington side by side, you might think they were vaguely related or maybe distant cousins, but they did not look like the same man.
After researching, each artist creates a 21-inch scale model called a maquette and takes it to the board for approval. After being approved, the artist starts over, creating a life-size bronze of the president. Each statue must be constructed in clay, disassembled into pieces. Forms are then built, poured with bronze, and the pieces are reassembled and welded together. The process is labor-intensive, and it takes between 6 to 8 months to complete a statue.
One of the reasons we decided to put life-size men on the street is that people driving by in the car would see this thing standing there and sometimes even put on their brakes, which is kind of a nice compliment. But then they become curious about what those are, and so they'll park their car and they'll get out and look at the statues. And then while they're out, they will go to lunch, they'll go shopping, they'll buy some souvenirs, they'll walk up and down the street. All of the presidents are on either Main Street or St. Joe in the commercial district. And so they're intended to bring people into the commercial district.
It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's public art, and I think people are interacting with them and getting their pictures taken with them and spending more time in downtown Rapid City, and that's what they were supposed to do.
While walking with the presidents, it's hard not to feel attached. Each beautifully detailed statue tells the story of the man, his legacy, and the presidency. And although these presidents are frozen in bronze, they exhibit a living personality that can be seen and felt.
A man wrote us a letter, and he said that he had brought his blind daughter to Rapid City to see the presidents. And that was very touching and very meaningful. Yeah.
You want people to have a reaction to it, to make an emotional connection to it. And that's what the art is all about.
The City of Presidents brings in people from around the world and has helped Rapid City be voted as the most presidential city in the U.S. by the readers of USA Today. Annually, people visit the City of Presidents to enjoy, honor, and remember the leaders of our nation. And in return, these presidents will continue to stand by the people, for generations to come.
To watch bonus material and hear the artists' stories from the City of Presidents project, visit our website. Have you ever looked at a painting and wondered what it would be like to be there? Well, thanks to a new Founding Fathers exhibit just south of Rapid City, you can do just that. And here's how.
You're probably familiar with this face. And this one. But what about this man? Or this face?
Francis Hopkinson designed the first version of the American flag that we have today.
These are the faces of farmers, merchants, lawyers, and preachers. 56 ordinary men who started a nation.
This is George Wythe. Thomas Jefferson considered him his second father. He was a mentor to Thomas Jefferson.
The men are part of an Independence Hall replica nestled just outside of Rapid City. Inside is a 3D representation of John Trumbull's painting about the presentation of the draft of the Declaration of Independence. But it's not the men standing in the foreground that make this exhibit interesting. It's the men that stood behind them.
Of course, everybody knows that Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and John Adams signed the Declaration of Independence. But very few people know that men like Oliver Wolcott or Robert Morris or Lewis Morris signed, and they all have fascinating life stories too.
This interactive exhibit features a 20-minute audio and light show, as well as 200-word biographies of everyone in the painting.
There's stories that we can grab onto and that help us to understand where they were coming from or what it was that they were doing.
We hope it makes history come to life for people, and for kids.
Richard Henry Lee, of the large Lee clan of Virginia, is the great orator. He sits next to Samuel Adams, cousin of John Adams, whose rabble-rousing rhetoric helped to fire the colonial revolt. John Witherspoon was born in Scotland, but became an American the moment he landed. He will later become president of the university we now know as Princeton.
Charles Carroll is the only Roman Catholic of the signers. For him, religious liberty was of the utmost importance. With Jefferson and John Adams, he would live to see the 50th anniversary of Independence Day. He would live on to the ripe old age of 95 as the last living signer.
Making the 47 figures displayed in the exhibit took a talented team of 4 artists who worked diligently to complete the men in 18 months. It was a task completely unfamiliar to the team, who had to figure out the most effective and efficient way to make the painting come alive.
By about halfway through, I began to realize that it was not simply a tourist attraction or a historical display. It was also a work of art.
The team used mannequins as a starting point for each man. The figures were cut to height, joints were constructed to accommodate poses, they were clothed, padding was added for shape, then finishes were applied. After the building itself was finished, the men were placed in the exact locations as they are seen in the painting. It was a painstaking process.
I didn't really have a grasp of how all the figures were going to work together. And when we got them out there and in place, and it really began to seem like they had a presence, I wasn't expecting that. It was just amazing to me.
No place else will you find statues that look more alive, hear stories that define their lives, or see lives that created a nation. Because behind the likes of Jefferson, Franklin, and Adams were men of equal importance. Men who sacrificed their wealth, their lives, and the lives of their families for their dream of a democracy.
For me and for my wife, as we were writing this, we talked about it often, that, would any of us today find the courage to stand up and do that?
If you'd like to see bonus materials about the Founding Fathers Black Hills exhibit, click on the link at our website. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode of Dakota Life. If you'd like to submit a story idea or leave us a comment, it's just a couple of clicks away at our website. For all of us here at South Dakota Public Broadcasting, thanks for making Dakota Life part of your life. Good boy, Buck. Job that presents some unique challenges. SDPB's Brian Gevick and videographer Josh Kapler hiked to the tower during the 2014 construction phase and brought back this look at the ongoing work.
The Harney Peak Lookout Tower was built by Civilian Conservation Corps workers in 1938 and 39. It's massive and sturdy looking, like it should stand forever. But perched on exposed granite at 7,242 feet above sea level, it's exposed to relentless weather extremes and occasional vandalism.
The windows were missing, the doors were missing, and a lot of the masonry was starting to fall apart. So water was infiltrating into the building and getting back behind the stonework, and it was starting to crumble. Particularly a spot where a member of the public had set a campfire on top of the terrace of the tower and burned through the roof.
You're watching a production of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Coming up on this episode of Dakota Life, we pack and climb to great South Dakota destinations. Explore renovations at the historic Fire Lookout Tower way up on Harney Peak, and see the horsepower behind the 3-mile trek to the summit. Learn 42 reasons why Rapid City was called the best presidential attraction. Plus, see how this American painting comes to life in the Black Hills. It's all coming up on this episode of Dakota Life. Hi, and welcome to Dakota Life. I'm Larry Rohr. The U.S. Forest Service in the Black Hills is involved in a multi-year project to restore the old stone lookout tower at Harney Peak.
Harney Peak is situated in the granite heart of the Black Hills, in the middle of the federally protected Black Elk Wilderness.
It's actually the highest point east of the Rocky Mountains. The next highest point is in the Pyrenees in Spain.
Load it up.
No motorized vehicles are allowed in the wilderness area, and no power tools. A road built for the 1930s project is long gone, so everything for the renovation project, from tools to construction materials to food and water, has to be carried up. Workdays begin and end with organizing, packing, and a 3.5-mile hike up and down roughly 1,100 vertical feet. The good news, pack mules and horses do most of the heavy lifting.
You know, the pack stock is definitely needed, working in the backcountry.
Glenn Ryan is a U.S. Forest Service packer in charge of the Rocky Mountain Regional Pack String. In 2012, the Forest Service came up with a preservation game plan for the structure. Since 30,000 to 40,000 people visit the tower annually, nobody liked the alternative to renovation.
So our intent is not to close it off from the public. We want people to enjoy it. We want people to feel the history.
The first fire spotters working on Harney Peak had some equipment, but no shelter.
In those days, that's all you had was the guy up there with a map and trying to call in a smoke.
At around the turn of the 20th century, a wooden shack was built and anchored to the mountain with heavy cables. People walked up the mountain to see it and to take in the spectacular view. Forest managers realized that they had a new priority.
A lookout tower that also served the purpose of recreation.
The location and elevation of the site challenged builders in the 1930s, and for today's preservationists, it's not a lot easier. One of just 2 in the nation. Ryan's getting help today from a group of South Dakota volunteers, 4 members of the Black Hills Backcountry Horsemen, Doug Beshen, Brad Bilka, and Jim and Alice Allen. Everything that goes up has to be weighed and balanced on the animals.
42. You know, what we're looking for is the weights and the size being the same. Even though the weights may be the same, if the size is different, that'll throw it off. I prefer using the mules to pack. They're stronger, they're more intelligent, their agility is much more so than a horse.
The pack string heads up the trail between Sylvan Lake and Harney Peak. If everything works out, the trip should take only a couple of hours, and a little quicker is a little better. They have another trip to do today.